Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar and workshop series conducted by TCS in lieu of the upcoming MCS exams happening in February 2025. My name is Nick and I'm one of the tutors for MCS at TCS. And today Jared is joining us, who is the lead tutor for MCS, and he will be taking you through the mock exam and its answer, as well as conducting this workshop in today's session. So let's have a look at the session outcomes. So first things first, Jared will be taking you through general feedback based on the mock exams which had come through. If I'm not mistaken, 2 or 3 students had already completed their 4th mock exam via the exam platform. And based on these answer scripts, Jared will be highlighting what the shortcomings are. And when conducting your preparations, make sure to avoid these shortcomings, thereby taking steps to improve your skill set. And also, as I mentioned earlier, Jared will be taking you through one of the mock exams which we have developed, thereby directing your attention towards a question to do with your F2 syllabus, and hopefully you'd gain a good understanding of how to tackle such questions when conducting your preparations. And at the very end, Jared will be conducting a Q&A session, because as per our study plan, you should be done with at least 2 mock exams by now. And definitely you will have questions, and all these questions will be addressed during the Q&A session. So Jared, over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first workshop by TCS for the February Management Case Study examination. So as Nick just briefed you, we would be looking at some general feedback coming from the most recently attempted mock exams. But before that, let me remind you of the upcoming workshops. So we have 2 more workshops. The next week's one is dedicated for discussion of P2 related topics, as well as a mock exam task. And then this will be followed by the workshop on E2. And we will then have a final workshop where we will discuss about exam preparation. So mark these dates and times in your calendar and do not miss out on the upcoming webinars. All right, so let's move on to the session. And the first thing, as we already briefed you, is about some general feedback coming from the scripts that we have been able to evaluate during the last week. One of the issues that we have noted is that candidates seem to deflect from the task requirement. Now, you need to understand that you are the finance manager of Shinyglas, and you are being presented with a task from your superior. So it's usually a response to an email. So when you are responding to an email from your superior, you have to make sure that whatever you put in that email is relevant and is specific to the task that your superior requires you to address. We've noted that candidates follow an academic style of answering where they try to demonstrate all that they know about the particular topic, or they try to talk about the company background, or it could sometimes be a case of not understanding the task requirement. So writing anything will not guarantee a pass, but writing points that are specifically relevant to the subtasks will only guarantee you marks. So as you prepare for the exam, I hope you will learn from your mistakes as well as from the mistakes of the other candidates. So make sure your answers are specific and tailor-made to the specific task requirement. We also observed that there was a lack of theory knowledge where required. I repeat, where required, especially if you take F2 related tasks. It was evident that some of the candidates had not prepared, well, because maybe the candidates had come through the exemption route and they did not recap the F2 related standards and accounting for group accounts, the ratio parts well enough that they couldn't just demonstrate the theoretical, or rather the technical knowledge pertaining to the subject. So remember, you will be required to demonstrate your technical knowledge, pertaining to the 3 subject areas where relevant. It doesn't mean that you have to dump theory or dump your technical knowledge, but you will have to build your responses on technical concepts where relevant. Furthermore, we also see the extreme of candidates dumping theory or writing more of technical points without applying them to the given scenario. Now, this was mostly evident with regard to E2 tasks, where you have to demonstrate that you can solve the issues from a practical context. For example, if there's a question on negotiation, you should be able to practically advise the management. It's not correct to get a theoretical background and to suggest something theoretical when you have a practical scenario presented in the reference material. So please make sure that any concepts, any theories are applied to the given scenario. And remember, the company that you work for is Shinyglas, and you will be encountering new developments in the unseen. That is your exam variant. So you have to make sure that you answer in that context. We've also seen that sometimes candidates talk about the past, but you have to focus on your exam, the up-to-date information presented to you in the tasks. Moreover, we also noticed that sometimes candidates had not discussed sufficient number of points to score a pass mark. Now, for instance, if the task is weighted at 60%, that means you should make sure you put in sufficient content, sufficient points for you to gain the allocated 60% of the marks. And this was also something that we saw, and sometimes it could be due to your typing speed. And this is an issue when you have not done PC-based exams and you're doing it for the first time, or usually you don't have to type so fast at your workplaces, and now all of a sudden you have a time constraint and you're trying to type as many points as you can, and you simply can't type as many as you would like. So please practice if that's an issue, because without sufficient content, it will be difficult for you to score the pass mark. And moreover, we also saw that some candidates got carried away with the answer plan. Now, you need to remember the answer plan is a mind map for you. So you will have to make sure that the answer plan is very brief. The answer plan gives you direction. The answer plan makes sure that whatever you type is within the scope of the task and that you don't get carried away. But at the same time, you have to make sure that the answer plan is sufficiently developed, expanded onto a full-fledged answer. So the best way to understand what should be the final output is to look at an answer published by the examiner, or you could simply look at the solutions for a mock exam suggested answers. And for instance, if you look at the suggested answers that we've published, you will see that points have been explained in paragraphs. So you should be able to sufficiently expand your points into paragraphs. So this was also missing in some of the scripts that we marked. All right, furthermore, it was evident that some had clearly not managed their time. Now, what makes us say so? Some candidates, when there are 2 subtasks or 3 subtasks, they have been able to answer only 1 out of the 2 or 2 out of the 3. So this clearly shows that when you started the answer, you did not allocate the time remaining across the 3 tasks. And as a result, you could not answer both tasks or all 3 subtasks. Now, this can also hurt you very big, because if you completely leave out a subtask unanswered, it can cost you about 7 to sometimes 12, 14% of the total marks. And that can be very difficult to catch up from the other tasks. So please make sure that you make note of these points and that you do not repeat this as you prepare for the examination. Furthermore, let me also remind you about what services we are offering for the upcoming management case study examination. So the feedback, the mock exams that we marked, and the feedback that we have been giving has been part of our premium package. So if you go to study at tcs.com and if you check out the MCS page, you will see the two study options that we provide to our students. And as you can see, the premium pack, which comes with a pass guarantee, provides the support that you need in terms of feedback on the mock examinations. So we provide feedback on 3 out of the 6 mock exams. So remember, if you subscribe to our premium pack, you will have access to all the webinars that we are conducting. And remember, you will have access to 6 exam standard mock exams with suggested answers. And let me remind you, when we say mock exams, these are 3-hour mock exams which resemble the examination. And often this is confused with what is sometimes called a task or a question. Those are not 3-hour full-fledged mock examinations. But if you take our 6 mock exams, very similar to 6 variants that come with one pre-scene, we've tried to cover the most likely areas across 6 papers so that you will have ample practice as you prepare for the examination. And also remember, you need to start with a pre-scene analysis, and we've got you covered with a pre-scene analysis videos, and then you will also have access to an annotated pre-scene. So this is a comprehensive document where we analyze the pre-scene from the perspective of possible issues. We analyze it from the perspective of relevant P2, E2, F2 areas that you will need to revise. And we also make sure that we give you a summary of the key points that you need to remember from each and every page. For instance, if you look at this page, we have made sure that you have a summary of the different types of glasses. So as you near the exam, you don't have to read through this entire document. You can simply refer to these summaries that we've provided to you, along with the possible issues and the likely areas that you need to be prepared for. So that's basically the annotated pre-scene that we offer. And on top of that, we also offer an industry analysis and financial analysis. We keep our industry analysis very brief because you need not know industry examples, or you need not demonstrate industry knowledge by writing about the industry, but knowing the industry, knowing some of the challenges the industry faces, knowing some of the trends could help you prepare for possible themes or possible issues in the exam. So our industry analysis is very brief. It covers only the most important parts of the industry, considering the management case study examination. And in the financial analysis card, we make sure that we perform a horizontal analysis of both the years. We also got you covered with the financial ratios along with the analysis. Furthermore, we also have a top 10 likely issues document where we try to highlight the 10 main issues that Shinyglas is facing, and how different areas and how different issues could come up based on these top 10 likely issues. And furthermore, we also have a case study familiarization kit. This will be helpful for anyone who is planning for the exam for the first time, preparing for the first time, to familiarize yourself with the management case study examination. And furthermore, remember, we have our WhatsApp group, and you can also personally reach out to me or Nick if you have any questions. And for those who have not gone through F2, P2, E2, OTQ examinations, we also have OTQ revision cards. And these make sure that you have the brought forward knowledge to prepare for the management case study examination. And remember, we have an online mock exam platform, pretty much a carbon copy of what your Pearson exam platform will be. So you get to practice in pretty much a similar platform before the examination, so that when you sit for the examination, it will not seem new, and you are unlikely to have navigation issues, or you are unlikely to be uncomfortable in starting the examination or trying to figure out how you should go about with navigating through the system. And as I already highlighted, we have one-to-one tutor feedback on 3 mock exams. And I can actually show you a sample later on. So we provide comprehensive feedback, which will be extremely helpful in making sure you show improvement, progress from one mock exam to the other. And on top of that, we also provide answer plan for all 6 mock exams. The answer plans decode the suggested answers. Now, for instance, if you take uh, the suggested answers, you will see that it is lengthy, and you will see that there's a lot of information to process. You may not understand the thinking, you may not understand the the structure, as well as how the points have been constructed. So that is why the suggested answers are broken down into an answer plan. So the answer plan will help you figure out, okay, this is exactly how I should be planning. This is exactly how I should make sure there is a flow of points. So this is to help you decode the suggested answers and closer to the examination, rather than trying to read through suggested answers as you revise for the exam. You have this document which is around 14 to 16 pages. The summarized version of it, the answer plan, will actually make sure it's easier for you to understand the key points that you need to cover if you are faced with a similar requirement. And furthermore, I would also need to highlight the fact that we have 20 master classes. So what are master classes? Well, these are pre-recorded videos where we explain each and every mock exam, and we explain the answers through the suggested answers, as well as, most importantly, the answer plans. So we make sure that candidates who require a tutorial, an explanation, an elaboration, a clarification on the suggested answers will be provided with that. So today I will actually demonstrate how these masterclass videos are done when we actually discuss one mock exam and when we look at the discussion. So it will make sure that the technical knowledge is recapped through the video, and it will also cover application of that technical knowledge to the specific task in each mock exam under each section. So 20 master classes, each master class in total will have about 2 to 3 hours of recording. So you're looking at about 14 to 16 hours of recorded videos where we decode the suggested answers. And also, a key highlight of the premium pack is that you get a pass guarantee. So this is subject to certain terms and conditions. You have to make sure that you attempt all 6 mock examinations, among others, and you have to make sure that you show some commitment with regard to following up with the study plan. And according to the pass guarantee, if you stick to the study plan and if you complete all the assigned tasks, and if you're still unsuccessful, in that case, we will provide you access to the materials in the immediately upcoming session. So for instance, if you are unsuccessful in the February examination, we will provide you with the resources, the study resources to prepare for the exam in May 2025. And you can check out more on that in our website. And also, for those who have completed CIMA objective test questions, those who think you can study on your own, you are more of a self-study oriented person, well, in that case, you could opt for the value pack, where you will have access to all these resources. But if you are coming through an exemption route where you have not set for F2, P2, E2, OTQ examinations, then of course you might need all the resources and the tools available for you to clear the exam in the first sitting. So that is where the premium pack would be helpful for you. And also we recommend this pack for candidates who may not have been successful in your previous attempts. So if you're looking to give a better shot this time, then do consider the premium pack, because it has all the resources that can help you come up with a better outcome this time. All right, so that's about the services that we offer in terms of the study options. And moving on, let's look at a mock exam task which relates to F2. All right, but before that, I would like to give you a brief overview of the F2 related topics that are usually tested, and therefore you need to be well equipped with in terms of your exam preparation. So we have this document, the syllabus coverage document. This relates to our 6 mock exams, and we have broken down the topics that we have covered under each of the 3 OTQ exam papers. And in today's session, I'll take you through advanced financial reporting, F2, because that would be the focus of the mock exam today. So remember, if you look at F2, you have to be thorough with sources of finance. So there are 2 main sources of finance, debt as well as equity. This is a topic which is often tested in the management case study examination. There would be some expansion plans, there could be some need for financing, and you should be able to analyze which sources would be appropriate and recommend the appropriate source for the company. So please be thorough with the different options that we have in terms of sources of finance. Furthermore, the weighted average cost of capital has also been tested. It relates to sources of finance, and this is something that you should be thorough with, because it's often tested. Could be because candidates do not perform well in this area. Typically, if you look at the examiner's reports, you will notice that this is not an area that candidates have demonstrated their understanding quite comprehensively. So you might want to make sure that you are prepared for a question on weighted average cost of capital. It could relate to, say, for instance, how a source of finance can affect the weighted average cost of capital, or how a particular event, say for instance, you have a case against the company, and different scenarios could also be brought under the WAC topic. And furthermore, group accounts. So remember, this is the first subject, F2, where you will be learning about accounting for companies which come under a group. So there can be subsidiaries, there can be associates, there can be joint ventures, or there can be an equity financial asset. So given the fact that F2 is the first subject where this topic is taught for CIMA students, you need to be prepared for questions relating to group accounts. So please make sure that you are thorough with how we account for subsidiaries, then the goodwill calculation that comes under subsidiaries, IFRS 3 business combinations, and IFRS 10 consolidated financial statements. And don't forget, there can also be a specific task which relates to non-controlling interests. So this will all come under accounting for a subsidiary, the goodwill and non-controlling interest calculations, as well as the accounting treatment. And also, when it comes to acquisition, there can be fair value adjustments that will be required to the subsidiaries' net assets. So we've also seen specific questions which focus on fair value adjustments alone. So you might want to be prepared with that as well. And as alternatives to subsidiaries, you can be tested on accounting for associates and joint ventures. So you will have to be thorough with IAS 28 as well. Furthermore, a separate topic, integrated reporting, which is 10% of the F2 syllabus. And there are no calculations in integrated reporting if you look at the F2 syllabus, but it is a topic which has been tested quite often in the management case study examination, because as you would be aware, companies as well as stakeholders are increasingly looking at reporting beyond financial aspects of a business. So there is this increased trend to report on ESG. So integrated reporting is actually the approach that all companies are following. So you could be required to address a task pertaining to integrated reporting, because remember, for Shinyglas, we've seen in the pre-scene that there are some stakeholder concerns about how sustainable the operations are, especially the double glazed windows manufacturing. You will need to have a good understanding about integrated reporting, and it will be not a very difficult task to handle in the examination, because as I already told you, unlike some of the other F2 areas, there are no calculations here. So it's all about knowing the concept, and it's all about being prepared to demonstrate application of the concept to Shinyglas in the given context. Furthermore, ratio analysis. So once again, a topic that is tested, and you sometimes don't get a specific task on ratio analysis, but it can be linked to some other area. For instance, we've had situations where we've seen a task, how the lease arrangement will affect certain ratios, right? So you need to be prepared to tackle a task which connects two F2 related topics. So accounting for leases, and then how those leases would affect the ratios of the company. So another important area. And then, of course, we have the financial reporting standards. So these are the key standards in the F2 syllabus. We have IFRS 3 business combinations, as I already pointed out. When it comes to goodwill accounting, you will need to demonstrate your knowledge on IFRS 3. And thereafter, you need to know IFRS 10, because this relates to consolidated financial statements. IFRS 15, revenue from contracts with customers, a standard which has also been tested quite often. And IFRS 16, as I just mentioned, leases. We've seen IFRS 16 also being tested in recent times. And thereafter, you could be required to demonstrate your knowledge on IAS 21, which relates to translation of foreign currencies. And IAS 24, related party transactions. We haven't seen this in recent times. That doesn't mean you can rule this out, because if it hasn't been tested in recent times, there is possibility that it could be tested in an upcoming examination, right? So please make sure that you don't rule out any financial reporting standard or any topic from the syllabus for that matter, just because it wasn't tested in recent times. Furthermore, you could also be tested on accounting for associates and joint ventures, which is what IAS 28 is all about. And moreover, IAS 33, earnings per share. Remember, the only ratio which has a dedicated accounting standard for it, EPS. And another favorite of the examiner, IAS 37, provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets. So there are three different areas here: provisions, contingent liabilities, as well as contingent assets. So you need to be thorough with this accounting standard as well. And another accounting standard which has been tested in every pre-seen examination. So that is one of the 6 variants at least, and usually more than that, test this accounting standard: intangible assets. So please do make sure that you have an idea about these accounting standards, because you need to remember that your examination, if you go with the blueprint, you are likely to encounter 2 or 3 subtasks on F2. So it'll be extremely difficult for you to clear the examination without being able to answer the 2 to 3 subtasks on financial reporting, because this could amount to 25% to 30% of the entire marks allocated in the examination. So you can't rule out. We've seen sometimes candidates, they rule out F2 because they think this is not my forte. I'm not very good with numbers. I'm not good with financial accounting. I'll try to get the marks from E2, P2 related tasks. Well, you could, but the question is, would it be sufficient for you to gain 54% of the marks, which is 80 out of 150? So that remains a huge question mark. And therefore, please make sure, regardless of your background, that you put in the effort to familiarize yourself with F2 areas of the syllabus. So that's a very brief overview of the F2 areas. And let me remind you, in our 6 mock examinations, we have included a subtask covering each of these financial reporting standards, because this document is prepared based on the syllabus coverage that we have in our mock exams, and our syllabus coverage in the mock exams have been based on the examiner's past variants, and we try to model those past variant tasks, but we try to make sure those are relevant to Shinyglas. All right, so that's about the syllabus overview of F2. So in the next week's webinar, we will look at the same with regard to P2. So in this document, you also have the P2 topics listed out. So I'll actually take you through that in the next workshop. And thereafter, we can also look at E2. All right, let's move on to the next item in the session plan, which is to refer to a mock exam task on F2. So we would be looking at the first mock examination, which we have made available free to all the candidates. You can access the paper in our study at TCS website, and you can even attempt the 3-hour exam for free in our exam platform. So those who have already attempted it will know that mock exam 1 relates to Shinyglas, looking at diversification. So we were looking at entering the market where there was a focus on solar panel windows, and this was mainly about more sustainable solutions when it came to the double glazed windows as well as doors. Now, as we fast forward to the third section, you will see that there is a task relating to F2, which is about accounting for leases. So considering the duration of the session, we will specifically focus on information pertaining to the F2 related task. So section 3, as you go to the second paragraph, you see that on a different matter, as you may be aware, the conference room and office space on the 4th floor of our head office building have been largely unused. While we have been hesitant to lease them out due to concerns over potential tenants, we now have a fitting proposal from Harrison & Co. Legal, a corporate law firm, who are interested in leasing the premises. The board has decided to lease out 4th floor to HCL, and the terms of the lease agreement are included in the second attachment to this email for your reference. So as we move on to the reference material section, we have 2 attachments, and the second attachment relates to the terms of the lease. So we are told that the lease term shall be for 3 years, commencing from 1st August 2025, with an option for HCL to extend the lease at market rate. Now, I will explain the terms of the lease in detail as we get to the answer. But right now, what we understand is it's going to be a lease for 3 years, and it is going to commence on a future date, that is 1st August 2025. So as you face the exam, you can assume that the timeline is February 2025. And the timeline can move forward from there. Because usually when you look at the sections, at the top, you would be told a month has passed or a few weeks have passed, or you can even be told today's date is. So just keep tabs with the timeline the section is mentioning. So here we can assume that the lease is yet to be entered and it is going to be entered in on a future date. And we are also told that the lessee has the option to extend the lease at market rate. So this means the lease is for 3 years, but if the lessee wishes, the lessee can extend the lease for a further period, and the rental will be based on the market rates prevalent at the time of renewal. And furthermore, we are also told that if the lease is cancelled within the 3-year period, the lessee, HCL, shall bear the legal costs of cancellation. So if they try to leave the premises by terminating the lease within the 3-year period, they will be bearing the legal costs associated with the cancellation. And we also given the lease rental, which is $240,000 per annum. So that's 12 months. And we are not sure whether this is for all 3 years. That is, the rate is for all 3 years. But since we don't have any other information, we can assume that all 3 years per annum, the rental will be 240,000. The first 2 years rental shall be paid in advance. All right. So that means when the lease commences, they will pay the first 2 years lease rental, which is 240,000 multiplied by 2. So $480,000 will be paid in advance at the time of signing the lease agreement on 1st July 2025. So we are going to sign the lease agreement on 1st July, but the tenancy, the occupation will commence from 1st August 2025. So 1 month before that, we would be signing, which is a normal practice. You would like to make sure that all the formalities are done before you allow the lessee to occupy the premises. And there is no refundable deposit associated with the lease agreement. So we got the basics covered. Okay. And let's look at the subtask. So we have 2 subtasks in this section. And as I told you, we will focus on the subtask that relates to F2. So we are told that we need to explain how the proposed lease should be treated in our financial statements. This is about the accounting treatment for the proposed lease. But there is another small requirement which follows. So we can say it's a sub-requirement within the subtask, including the income to be recognized in the current year's financial statements. So a candidate who follows the examiner's style of writing answers would make sure that there is a heading for this first sub-requirement, the accounting treatment, or how the proposed lease should be treated in our financial statement. So if you look at our suggested answers, we make sure that we have the same captured in a separate heading, right? So as you can see, section 3, how the lease should be treated in our financial statement. So that's one sub-requirement, and we have a separate heading for that. Thereafter, we also notice that we have to also explain, or we have to state the income to be recognized in the current year's financial statement. So that would be the financial statements for 2025. So that, of course, can be brought under a separate heading just to make sure that it is very clear to the marker that, look here, I have addressed both sub-requirements, right? So please make sure that you have these subheadings, because they also provide you some guidance that you should be addressing 2 separate requirements, and that you don't miss out on those as you write the answers under a time-constrained, pressurized environment. All right, first things first, let's look at how the lease should be treated in the financial statement. So this is the suggested answers. But before that, let's actually look at the answer plan, where we try to decode the approach to building this response. So this is where the answer plans are helpful. And this is a document that we make available for each and every mock exam. So this is the answer plan for mock exam 1. And as you move to section 3, subtask B, you will see the answer plan for the task on the lease. So first things first, let me highlight 4 key points that you should make sure you cover in an F2 answer which deals with a specific accounting standard. Well, the first thing is you need to state the relevant financial reporting standard. It could be an IAS or it could be an IFRS. So please make sure you state and demonstrate your knowledge that, look here, I know leases should be treated in accordance with this specific accounting standard. So this is exactly what we've done as well. As you can see, IFRS 16 leases. And if you look at the suggested answers, that's exactly what we have done. As we start the answer, we've clearly set out, right, that okay, the lease should be accounted for in our financial statements as per IFRS 16 leases. So that's a good start. The marker is convinced that you know the accounting standard. And secondly, you will need to demonstrate your understanding of the accounting standard, because you will need to set out, yes, you will need to set out the relevant points from the accounting standard. So sometimes there are definitions that are relevant, and you need to make sure that the definition is stated. Sometimes there are conditions that are relevant. For instance, if you take provisions, there are 3 conditions that should be satisfied to create a provision. If you take IAS 38, capitalization of development expenditure, there are 6 conditions that are relevant. So you need to make sure that you set out the relevant definitions or the relevant conditions or the criteria that the accounting standard sets out. And thereafter, it's all about application to the scenario. So this is where you will analyze whether the conditions are satisfied in the given scenario, or whether the criteria has been fulfilled in the given scenario. So this is actually where your skills with regard to applying the technical knowledge to a case study related scenario is tested. And this is something that will require some practice, because it's Shinyglas and it's a case study related to Shinyglas. So you will need to see how these different accounting standards can relate to Shinyglas in a given scenario. So the given scenario for you here is a lease, and these are the terms of the lease. And remember, in your actual examination, you could be tested on IFRS 16 with reference to Shinyglas, but on a slightly different context, because this information can be different in the examination. So considering the information, you have to make sure that your application is correct. And thereafter, when you're satisfied whether the conditions have been fulfilled, or whether the criteria has been fulfilled, or whether the particular scenario satisfies the definition of, say, for instance, as an intangible asset or a provision, then finally you have to conclude your answer by stating out the accounting treatment, the relevant accounting treatment based on the application to the given scenario. So any question, any task pertaining to IAS, IFRS will require you to cover 4 aspects within the answer. And if you look at our answers, we make sure that all 4 of them are complete. So you look at the first one, we start with IFRS 16, and then we say that, look here, this is the first step that IFRS 16 sets out, which is basically about setting out the framework. And we also set out, look here, this is how we will need to apply the framework to the given scenario. So can you see we've highlighted application? So that's basically the third step, right? And finally, you will see that we have set out the accounting treatment. Yeah, that's the fourth and final aspect of the answer. So we've got all four aspects covered. And if you make sure that you do the same for a task on IAS and IFRS, you can make sure that you gain those pass marks for the specific subtask. All right, so let's go with the answer plan. So first things first, we have highlighted that this is a transaction which must be dealt with under IFRS 16 leases. And you will need to set out that in terms of IFRS 16, in the present scenario, we find that Shinyglas is the lessor, and we have to account for the lease in terms of lessor accounting principles in IFRS 16. Because remember, a lease is accounted by the lessor as well as the lessee. And in this given context, Shinyglas is the lessor. So we have to apply the accounting treatment relevant for the lessor. On the other hand, if by any chance Shinyglas leases out a property or a machine or any other assets, Shinyglas will have to put itself in the shoes of the lessee and will have to account for the lease as a lessee. So a question that might come to you is, look here, IFRS 16 leases in the F2 text, we only find accounting from the perspective of the lessor. So should we be thorough with accounting for the lease from the perspective of the lessee? Well, the answer is yes. Why? Because in F1, you are taught on how a lease should be accounted from the perspective of the lessee. So you might have a question, but look here, it's a management case study and the case study should be based on F2. How come, something which is covered in F1 can be tested? Well, valid question, but it is assumed that some of the key learnings from the operational level are brought in to the management case study examination. And we've seen lessee accounting being tested in the management case study examination. In fact, last year, 2024, if you take one of the variants, accounting from the perspective of the lessee was also tested. But don't worry, we've got you covered. We have a subtask on accounting for a lease from the perspective of the lessee. So once you go through the mock exam, once you refer to the suggested answer, and once you watch the masterclass video, you will have a clear idea about how a lease should be accounted from the perspective of the lessee. So that's something that we've got covered as well. So for now, we'll focus on how an accounting for a lease should be approached from the perspective of the lessor. So in our answer plan, we focused only on the relevant points, but if you refer to our suggested answer, we have set out all the relevant criteria, right? The relevant criteria that must be considered when deciding how to classify the lease. Because in terms of IFRS 16 leases, if you are the lessor, the first step for you as the lessor is to determine what is the classification of the lease. Is it a finance lease or is it an operating lease? Finance lease is treated differently in the accounts from an operating lease. So the first step is to determine whether the nature of the lease is a finance lease or an operating lease. And this is the guidance that you find in IFRS 16. IFRS 16 states that when you are determining whether a lease is a finance lease, here are some indicative characteristics. And in our suggested answer, for learning purposes, we have set out all the indicative characteristics. But we have also added a tutorial note where we have said, look here, it is not necessary for a candidate to list out all the characteristics of a finance lease. We've done so for the purpose of learning. So what are you required to do in the examination? Well, in the examination, all the characteristics relevant for the given scenario must be set out. So firstly, we will look at the relevant characteristics based on the given scenario. And thereafter, I'll explain the others because you should also be prepared for the other characteristics in case if they appear in your examination. All right. So if you look at the mock exam question, right, we are told that the least term. Now, this is where we are going to analyze the terms because we have to see whether the characteristics have been fulfilled, right? So first thing is the least term shall be for 3 years, right? Here we are. Now, the lease term is something that we should take into consideration when determining whether a lease is a finance lease or an operating lease. Because IFRS 16 states that if the lease term is for a major part of the asset's useful life. So the useful life represents the useful economic life of the asset. How long can we use this asset? How long will we derive future economic benefits from the asset? And in this case, the lease, is it for a major part of the asset's useful life? Or is it not for a major part of the asset's useful life? So the asset here is a building, and we are renting out the 4th floor of the building. And we are renting out the 4th floor of the building for a period of 3 years. Now, definitely, a building has a useful life of more than 3 years. You can't say that a 3-year period is a major portion of the land's useful life, or in this case, in this case, the building, right? The building is definitely going to have a useful life of more than 3 years. So one relevant characteristic is that the lease period, it is not for a major part of the asset's useful life. If it is for a major part of the asset's useful life, then it's an indication of a finance lease. But in this case, it is not for a major part of the asset's useful life. So it is not an indication of a finance lease. So we are leaning more towards operating lease when we consider this characteristic. But hold on, that's not the only relevant characteristic. We have more information in the reference material. As we read on, we are told that the lease commences on 1st of August, so that doesn't have much bearing. And thereafter, we are told there's an option for the lessee, HCL, to extend the lease at market rate. This becomes relevant. This is, of course, a characteristic which we should take into account when determining whether it's a finance or an operating lease. Now, IFRS 16 states that if the lessee can renew, or if the lessee can continue the lease for a secondary period at a rate below the market rent. I repeat, at a rate below the market rent, then it's a finance lease. So here in the reference material, we are told that, the lease can be continued. It can be extended for a secondary period, but at market rate. If it is at market rate, well, then it's not a finance lease because IFRS 16 states if it is for a rate or rent below the market rate, then it's a finance lease. So we have another indication here that it is not a finance lease, right? And in your answers, you have to make sure that you explain these characteristics and you demonstrate application. So if you look at the answer plan, you see that we've set out the characteristic, right? And thereafter, we have application. So let's read the question fully, the reference material fully, and make sure that we pick all the characteristics. All right, as we read further, we are told that if the lease is cancelled within the 3-year period, the lessee, HCL, shall bear the legal costs of cancellation. Now, this is something relevant for us because this is another characteristic listed in IFRS 16. So as we go to IFRS 16, the list of characteristics, you will see that the lessee bears losses arising from cancelling the lease. If it is the lessee who should bear the costs or the losses arising from cancelling the lease, then it is a finance lease. So in this case, this characteristic is satisfied because the lessee HCL bears the costs or the losses arising from cancelling the lease. So we have a situation where, two characteristics suggest that it is not a finance lease, and one characteristic suggests that it is a finance lease. All right, let's anyways read further and see whether we have any other characteristics here. So we see that the next bullet point relates to the rental. That is not something which is mentioned here, and it's not something that we can take into account, right? And furthermore, we also have how the rent is to be paid. It will be paid in advance at the time of signing, and then there is no refundable deposit. So we have to work within the first two bullet points, the three characteristics that we have found. So in the suggested answer, you have to highlight these three and you have to demonstrate application. So as you can see here in our answer plan, where we are stating that the first characteristic that I highlighted, right? The lease term is for the major part of the asset's useful life. So this characteristic is not satisfied in the given scenario. And secondly, another characteristic we observe is that the lease can be renewed by the lessee for another period at below the market rent. And this characteristic is also not present in this context. So two characteristics are not present, but there is one which is present. That is, the lessee bears losses arising from cancelling the lease, right? So you have to make a decision. You have two characteristics in favor of an operating lease, right? And you have one characteristic in favor of a finance lease. We intentionally designed this question in such a way that the candidates will have to make a decision in the examination. We haven't made it very straightforward. So the candidate will have to make a decision, and it's a very practical scenario, because in the real world you won't get scenarios where all these characteristics are perfectly satisfied for you to conclude, okay, all the 7 criteria are rightly fitting into place and it's a finance lease, or all the 7 criteria are not fulfilled and therefore it's an operating lease. It doesn't work like that in real life. Some characteristics may indicate it's a finance lease. Some characteristics may indicate that it's an operating lease. And as the accountant, you will have to make a decision, and you have to make sure that the financial statements present a true and fair view. And in that perspective, you will have to look at where it weighs more. Where does it lean more? Is it the operating lease or the finance lease? So if you take this particular task, if you look at the 3 characteristics, we have 2 characteristics which indicate that it is not a finance lease. And furthermore, if you really look at the nature of these characteristics, right, you will observe that the characteristic which relates to the useful life is something that we have to consider as more significant compared to who bears the losses arising from cancelling the lease. And you have to weigh in, and you have to decide that, look here, these are more prominent characteristics, and since even the numbers outweigh, we will have to conclude that it is an operating lease. So the overall conclusion reached is that of an operating lease. And how do we account for the operating lease? Well, it's straightforward and it's easy. And all the lease receipts, the income, the lease rentals that we receive, lease receipts, should be shown as income, other income in the SOPL, statement of profit or loss, on a straight line basis over the 3-year term, because it's very clear that the rental per annum is 240,000. It is not changing 1 year to another. So we can consider accounting it on a straight line method where we simply take 240,000 per annum as the rental income. I see a question in the chat. I will take that up shortly. Don't worry. Right. But for now, let me proceed with the discussion. And I'm also inclined to answer any other questions that you may have with regard to today's topic or any other F2 area. But I'll open up the Q&A session for that. So for now, let me actually finish the discussion so that it's easy to take the discussion thereon. All right. So with regard to the accounting treatment, also remember that we have to consider that there is an accounting period overlap here. I'll shortly come to it. We can't simply put 240,000 as the lease income, because that's exactly where the second requirement comes into the picture as well. What should we recognize as the lease income for the current year, right? So before that, let me also highlight, in this case, Shinyglas should recognize a lease income of 240,000 per annum, right? Straight line basis. And if there is any difference between the amounts that we recognize in the SOPL, right, that is the income recognized for an accounting period versus the income received. Sometimes there can be prepayments, as in this case. Sometimes there can be accruals. So any difference between the amount that you record in the SOPL and any versus the amount that you received in cash. Sometimes you would have received lesser cash compared to what you recognize as the income. Sometimes you would have received more cash. So in terms of accounting, we treat them as accrued income in case if there's a due, or we treat it as deferred income in the event that we have received an advance payment beyond the accounting period, which is the case here, right? Because if you look at Shinyglas and if you look at the accounting period, right? So let's go to the financial statements, right? So as you can see, Shinyglas, the accounting year end is 30th September. So we are looking at the preparation of financial statements for the year ending 30th September 2025. And we have a lease which commences on the 1st of August. So we need to account for the lease income for August 2025 as well as September 2025 in the financial statements prepared for the year ending 30th September 2025. So we need to account for only 2 months lease rental as the income for this financial year. That's what the second sub requirement is all about. You have to demonstrate your understanding of the accruals concept at a higher level here. It's about the lease income to be recognized in the current year's financial statement. So you start with the SOPL, and you have to highlight the fact that, look here, the financial year end is 30th September 2025, and the lease is commencing on 1st August 2025. So that means we are looking at a 2-month period. So in the SOPL, recognize lease rent, recognize income that is related to these 2 months, right? So remember, the per annum lease rental is 240,000. And if you divide it by 12 months, you will get the per month lease rental of 20 grand or 20K. So 2 months, 20,000 multiplied by 2, and that is what we will show as the income for the financial statements for the year end of 30th September 2025. And what happens to the rest? What happens to the rest? Because we are told that when we sign this deal, on 1st July 2025, we will receive the first 2 years lease rental. So 240K per annum, and we are going to receive the first 2 years lease rental at once. So $480,000 will be received at once. So as I already mentioned, if there's a difference between the lease amount we recognize as income and the lease amount that we have received, you have to treat it as an accrued income or a deferred income, depending on whether it is accrued or prepaid. So in this case, we clearly have a prepayment, an advance payment. So from the total 480,000, you remove the income relevant for the current year, the 40,000, and the remainder $440,000 will be recognized as deferred income in the SOFP as at 30th September 2025. The reason is this is a lease rental related to the period after the financial year end. So that's pretty basic, although it may have seemed like, a lot to write. You could simply write it in 2 paragraphs in the examination, right? So if you look at our suggested answer also, we've actually explained it very briefly. 2 paragraphs would do for the expansion of the answer plan. All right. One last thing. I said that I would also explain to you the other characteristics that you should be aware of when determining whether it's a finance lease or an operating lease. So remember, there are 7 characteristics, and if these characteristics are satisfied, then it's a finance lease. Okay. So we've considered 3, and let's look at the remainder. So first and foremost, IFRS 16 states that if the ownership of the asset is transferred to the lessee at the end of the lease, well, then it's a finance lease, because effectively you, as the lessor, will lose ownership of the asset. So it's basically a finance lease. You're basically financing the lessee acquire the asset. And furthermore, if the lessee has the option to purchase the asset, right? Purchase the asset for a price which is substantially below the fair value of the asset. So simply understand fair value as the market value of the asset. So if we provide the option to the lessee within the lease agreement for the lessee to buy the asset at a price which would be substantially below the fair value of the asset, and there's a conjunction here, don't forget, and if it is reasonably certain the option will be exercised, well, then it's a finance lease. It's a clear indication that you will lose ownership of the asset. You are helping someone acquire an asset. Well, that's what we call as a finance lease, right? You are not going to be holding on to the asset, and the lessee is going to get ownership of the asset, and the lessee has the option to buy the asset at a price which is substantially below the fair value of the asset. And you're ready for it because it is reasonably certain that the option will be exercised. And don't worry, your reference material in the examination will be very clear if this is the case, right? You won't be required to make sophisticated judgments like how you saw here. The information will be explicit for you to make the decision. So just be thorough with the characteristics, just be thorough with the accounting treatment, because you could also be tested on how a finance lease is accounted. So we actually have explained that also, in study resources. If you look at the F2 recap notes, we have also explained how a finance lease is accounted, right? So just be prepared for both extremes, right? You can be tested on accounting for a finance lease as well, right? Furthermore, don't forget that sometimes, right, in rare instances, you could be basically given the value of the asset, right? The market value or the fair value of the asset. And if you are presented with the present value of the lease payments, then this particular characteristic comes into the picture. So remember, when we say present value, this is based on discounted cash flows, right? So if you come across a scenario where the present value of the minimum lease payments amount to substantially all of the fair value of the asset, right? I repeat, the present value, today's value of all the lease payments, the minimum lease payments. You must make these lease payments. If the total of this amounts to substantially, that is, to a great extent, all of the fair value of the asset, it simply means that the lessee is actually paying the entire value of the asset. Over the lease period, it could be 3 years, it could be 5 years. Over the lease period, the lessee ends up paying substantially all of the fair value of the asset. So in such a case also, you will have to treat the lease as a finance lease. And one last point of discussion, if the leased asset is of such specialized nature that only the lessee can use them without major modification, you will need to consider it as a finance lease. Now, a good example is if you install a machinery, if you install equipment, or if you renovate your plant with some new technology and so on, right? And if it is something that you are taking under a lease, and if it is of such specialized nature, the asset, the investment that you're making on the machine, the equipment is of such specialized nature that only the lessee can use them without major modification, then that is another indication it is a finance lease. Because remember, it is effectively as though the asset was tailor-made, customized for the lessee. Someone else can't use the asset without major modifications, right? So based on these characteristics, you will need to decide if it is a finance lease or an operating lease. Now, I know that you will have some questions pertaining to these characteristics. I'm more than happy to take them up when we move on to the Q&A. So that's about the answer discussion and the explanation of the characteristics. So please make sure that you are thorough with these characteristics, and please make sure that you also follow the right approach towards answering the task in the exam. And we would also like to share the success story of one of our candidates from the past session. I actually remember this candidate who reached out to me after one of the workshops that I conducted. Had about 10 days for the exam, and wasn't ready, hadn't known the content, and reached out and asked whether she could pull that off. And of course, we gave a study plan for the remaining 10 or 12 days that the candidate had. And we have to also credit the candidate that the candidate kept up with the plan, worked, and managed to score 93, which was fantastic, considering the fact that the student invested and started to prepare for the exam just 10-12 days before, and had no choice because the student had already booked the exam and had no way out and had to go with something, but committed and pulled it off. So it was actually a great achievement from the perspective of the candidate, as well as as tutors, we are elated to see the results of such candidates. So we encourage you, if you have still not invested with a study partner, to consider the options that we have. All right, let's open up the session for a Q&A, and I will pause the recording to facilitate any questions that you would have pertaining to the discussion. All right, so thank you for the questions that you raised, and please feel free to raise questions in our WhatsApp groups. And please do remember that we have 2 more workshops coming up, and you can always raise your questions in the upcoming webinars as well. So let me remind you about how you can contact us. You can check out our website, you can email us, or, it's also possible for us to respond to your questions on WhatsApp. So please do reach out to us, especially those who are yet to start preparing for the examination. If you need a 3-week study plan, you can always drop us a text, and we will share the 3-week study plan that we have. Those who are already working on the 4-week study plan or the 7-week study plan, please do stick to it. But for those who are yet to get started, we do have a customized study plan as well. And let me also remind you of our social media handles, where you will find some useful content. Especially please do check out our YouTube as well as TikTok platforms, where we will have these short videos which will summarize pre-scene analysis content and also useful tips as you prepare for the examination. So that's basically all from us for today. Thank you for joining. Hope to see you in the upcoming workshops as well. Have a great evening and a great weekend. See you next week. Thank you and all the best.